The fifth graders are graduating from elementary school. So what we do is last day of school, you let the kids out at about noon, and then they walk onto the school door. They go down the street, and there's a whole street full of people on both sides of the street with water balloons that are filled up in coolers. And we all just pelt the fifth graders with water balloons. And that's the celebration. Chris, what's your hot take? Is it innocent fun? Is it all safe, or is there some risk and liability?
I think you do the event an injustice and mischaracterization in talking about what that is. Had it been that, and had your depiction been accurate, maybe. In fact, what it is, everybody lines up 30 minutes before, and for the 30 minutes before school lets out, everybody hits each other and every passing car and every person walking down the street. So if you're not prepared for that and you walk down the street or you drive your car down the street, you are going to get hit by 100 water balloons. If your windows are open, they are going to go in your car. If your top is down, they're going to go in your car.
Welcome to episode 72 of the Weekly Docket from the Silberman Law Firm. Today is May 29th, 2025. We talk legal news and practical law. My name is Phil Silberman, owner of the firm, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Heald, who's our supervising attorney and litigation and probate expert. So, Chris, normally I ask you how you're doing, but I thought I'd just randomly ask you about something you like to do. And for those listeners that don't know, Chris is actually a really good poker player. So, Chris, for our beginner, novice, or even intermediate poker players out there, if you could give like a tip to a guy like me that might just play poker once a year, what would your tip be?
Wow, firing out of the gate, huh? Scared money don't make money. Play more aggressively. Always play more aggressively.
Okay, so right off the bat, come on and play aggressive. I actually thought the opposite. I thought you were going to say, if you're a beginner, maybe let the night develop a little bit, get a feel for it. And then when you finally do have that big hand, that's when you get really aggressive, right?
No, because then I'll notice you haven't played all night. And the second you play a hand, everybody's going to fold.
This is why Chris is an excellent poker player and an excellent litigator. You got to have a little bit of that gambling fever to be a good litigator. So thanks for that tip, Chris. I'll be using that at the annual men's night of poker somewhere. All right, let's talk about what's on our docket today. So the first thing we're going to talk about is it okay to pelt fifth graders with water balloons? We'll get there in a moment. And then moving right along to North Korean laptop farms in your neighborhood. And then we'll be talking about compensation for executors associated with the probates. And then we want to discuss how to read a statute. How do you read these things? Some of these things are complex. We'll be talking about how to read them. And then finally, we'll talk about what to do when your contractors are trying to fix, repair, or renovate something at your home and they break something, how that typically goes. So let's go ahead and get it kicked off with our legal news section. And the first thing we're talking about is graduation season. Now, I don't know how everyone feels about graduation. It used to be in the old days, it was high school graduation, college graduation. Nowadays, we do a graduation celebration for preschool, fifth grade, eighth grade, just about every kind of matriculation there is. Chris, how do you feel about that? Are you a fan of kind of the graduation fever that sweeps across Texas in May?
As long as my kids can't hear me, no, I'm not. And I certainly want to be there for my kids. I love seeing my kids do well, but I do think it's a little ridiculous that we have to celebrate everything. I think we should celebrate momentous occasions. I don't think we need to celebrate moving on to the next year every single time. We're moving on to the next.
Chris, I'm with you. I think graduation should be reserved for some more kind of important graduations like the high school graduation or college graduation. I think all of this celebration we do emanates from this snowflake culture that we're building and constantly trying to give people participation trophies and make them feel good about everything. So it was like the high school that I graduated from, where my daughter's going to school next year. I went to hear a little speech by the principal. And the principal said, this is the first year that this school will not have a valedictorian because we think everybody is special and should be celebrated. And I was like, wait a minute, this is crazy. At some point, when I went to that high school, we were all trying to beat each other to be valedictorian. I was never going to be that, by the way, in high school, but nonetheless, we were trying. And nowadays, everybody's special, everybody gets celebrated. So,
I,
Chris,
I
I
have
think
not heard that. That's pure insanity. That is sad. That is ridiculous because 98% of the kids know they have no chance and they're fine with it. But for the 5 kids out of 500 that want to try, let them try, let them compete, let them get the respect of their peers when they do it. That's really crazy because no one who graduates in the middle of their class should feel like they're on par with the valedictorian. They may be better in other aspects of their lives, and certainly grades don't always indicate success. But if that's what you want to go for and that's your goal in high school, to do something that takes away from competitiveness and achievement, that's very odd.
it's making it hard on us, Chris, because as a society, we're now encouraging and raising a bunch of snowflakes. So by the time they get to us and we're trying to hire and recruit attorneys, it's hard as an employer to know really who's been tested, who excelled in their class, because you've got so much grade inflation and you've got so much safe places and participation, and there's no ranking. And it's not just our firm. There's a lot of big employers out economy that have actually had to do their own entrance exams during job interviews to figure out where these kids are really ranking and what kind of kids they're getting, because academia isn't giving them the real numbers anymore. So if you used to be a kid went to Yale or Harvard or some of these prestigious schools, you would know, hey, this kid's sharp and he was top of his class at Harvard or whatever. But that's not the case anymore. All right, we digress. So Chris and I are on the
I'm
same
old enough
page
to
on that.
remember when GPAs were on a 4-point scale. I couldn't even tell you what they are now.
No, there's so much great inflation in these things. All right, we got to talk about this. There's this one elementary school that's local to the area where we live, and Chris and I have both been to this event, and my kids have been part of it. And what I'll tell you goes on is we want to celebrate the fifth graders, right? The fifth graders are graduating from elementary school. So what we do is last day of school, you let the kids out at about noon, and then they walk onto the school door, they go down the street, and there's a whole street full of people on both sides of the street with water balloons that are filled up in coolers. And we all just pelt the fifth graders with water balloons. And that's the celebration. Chris, what's your hot take? Is it innocent fun? Is it all safe, or is there some risk and liability?
I think you do the event an injustice and mischaracterization in talking about what that is. Had it been that, and had your depiction been accurate, maybe. In fact, what it is, everybody lines up 30 minutes before, and for the 30 minutes before school lets out, everybody hits each other and every passing car and every person walking down the street. So if you're not prepared for that and you walk down the street or you drive your car down the street, you are going to get hit by 100 water balloons. If your windows are open, they are going to go in your car. If your top is down, they're going to go in your car. It
Okay,
is
so you added another layer to it that I was unfamiliar with it, but they're still throwing the balloons at the fifth graders.
But by the time the fifth graders come, people have been out there throwing balloons for 30 minutes.
Okay, I had forgotten that, or I didn't realize that. So let's talk a little bit about assumption of risk. Now, I'm not necessarily coming down on a side. I think for the right kid, he may enjoy it. But let's say you've got a scenario where there's a kid going down the street and the kid gets pelted with a water balloon in the face, and maybe the kid gets injured. What do you think, Chris? Liability or assumption of risk? No issue.
I feel bad for the kid because probably no liability. It's probably good fun as long as I would hope that everybody's a willing participant. I hope if you don't really want to go that there's no hazing or peer pressure to go. If someone really says, no, I don't feel comfortable, I really don't want to walk down the street, get hit by water balloons, I hope those children are allowed not to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
The kids are definitely allowed not to do it. There are kids that opt out of it. I have personally seen some kids in previous years where they are just in full tears at the end of it. I've seen kids were there any kids this year, Chris, that put football helmets on?
A lot of people had their bike helmets on.
Yeah. So here's an interesting thing. Let's assume these kids were adults. If adults consent to go walk down the street and get pelted with balloons, I think that's clearly a assumption of risk. The adult is assuming that
That's
risk.
why I was there. We make our fantasy football league loser do it. So
Okay.
that's why I was there. The loser of our league had to go and do it.
Okay. So that's good. That adult had consented. I would say very clearly if that adult goes out there and something terrible happens, say the adult loses an eye or something, there's an assumption of risk. I say no liability. Now, with the child, there's an interesting thing. Can the child really consent to doing that? Or are the parents implicitly consenting for the child to go and participate in that? Maybe. So there's that level to it. And if I were to draw an analogy between this event and, say, a golf course, if you think about assumption of risk with a golf course being the classic example, if you have a home on a golf course and your window gets broken by a golf ball, the golfer is not liable for trespass or damage. The homeowner who lived on a golf course assumed that risk, absent any kind of extenuating circumstances where the guy just tees up and aims at pops, right?
Tees up from the fairway and just drives it right into your window.
Right. Or you could say the same thing about even Chris, your friend who lost the fantasy football tournament. If you were to go get like a potato gun that was propelled or powered by some sort of CO2 cartridges, and you were to pelt water balloons at the guy's face at 125 miles an hour, he probably did not sign up to assume that level of risk. You may be liable.
I would hope so. Yes.
Yeah. So I think the listeners are getting a flavor for when these kinds of things happen, what the liability regime really is. And Chris, this event, by the way, has not been without criticism. And it's not, in fact, I think the principal, I don't want to misquote it, some principal or maybe some of the teachers, or there's been some people in the community that have said, we really ought not to have this event, but it was such a time-honored tradition that it's still going on. I think mostly it works out okay. I will say this to close up this section. My oldest kid, big kid, baseball guy, after he graduated from the school and he was in the 6th grade, I think he came back to maybe watch his sister do it. And it was a problem because even at his age, he was firing water balloons way too hard. Not just at the kids, but Chris, like at moms across the street. Okay. So you need to use some common sense about this thing. This isn't a free for all, but certainly there's a component of assumption of risk here. All right, let's move on to our next legal news piece, in as much as that was a legal news piece. We just discussed the water balloon thing, but let's go ahead and move on to our next legal news piece. Chris, are you familiar with sort of laptop farms or ways that countries that are facing huge amount of sanctions attempt to get money into their economy? Have you heard about any of this stuff?
I have not. I think I can picture something where people have a lot of computers running for, I could imagine, several dozen purposes, but I imagine you're going to tell me exactly what they're doing.
Let me set this up for you. Okay. This was a Wall Street Journal article. I just learned about it. There was this lady, Christina Chapman, and she seemed like a nice lady. She was having some hard times and she did not have a job at the time. And she saw some LinkedIn advertising or some type of post that said, hey, we're looking for an American face for our company. She ends up getting in. It's totally a scam. And maybe she was the victim at first, but she ends up getting involved with this North Korean outfit. And the way this works is there are programmers in North Korea that go to technical schools that are excellent programmers, and they go to school educated in North Korea. And what they do is they apply for work from home jobs doing computer programming with U.S. companies. But they need an American bank account. They need an American person to be complicit in this scheme with them so that they can get the money back into North Korea. So what Christina Chapman ends up doing is she gets all these laptops because just like us, we have people work remote and we ship laptops. If we shipped a laptop to somebody And let's say I hired an administrative employee, ship a laptop there, and I would expect, and maybe it's really a North Korean, Chris, that our admin staff, they're really North Koreans. And then I'm paying this American person, and then that American person gets the money and then somehow, I don't know, sends it to North Korea some kind of way, maybe probably through China and probably using Bitcoin. I'm just making something up. However, they're going to get money over to North Korea eventually. And that's like the scheme. Now, some companies will do what they call a liveness check, right? And they'll make people do a video meeting. And the North Koreans, they got really good at this, Chris. They would actually go on like the Zoom meeting or whatever. And they had this special sort of lens or this software that would make them look like an American. But then so they were actually the North Korean programmer dressed the software was making them look like, I guess, a regular American. I don't know what that looks like, Chris, and then the companies got wise to that. So that in the liveness check, Chris, can you do this so I can make sure you're not really a North Korean? Can you do this? Put your hand in front of your face like that. See, Chris isn't a North Korean. And it would glitch. Chris, you're not actually a North Korean. That's it. That's a good thing. So she gets involved in this scam. And Chris, what do you think? Good case against her if you're a federal prosecutor based on the facts as it stands now? Are you going to believe her defense attorney? Is the jury going to believe the defense attorney that she had no idea what was going on and she just thought she was legitimately setting up 90 laptops, that she's not criminally culpable?
Where was she? Was she in North Korea or was she?
No, she's in the United States in her home somewhere. I think she was in Phoenix or something.
So what are the 90 laptops doing?
They get shipped to her. They get set up. The person from overseas walks her through on how to set them up and turn them on. And you know how we have law firm tracking and productivity software. The North Korean person tells her what to do, sets it up, and then the North Korean person logs on remotely and does all the coding and programming work.
Okay, so they're logging on just like I can open my laptop and I could share it so someone at a different site could then just control my laptop.
Right.
And so it makes it look like they are working from the United States. So whatever company they're working for sees that Joe is in Phoenix, Joe is logged on, Joe's doing his programming.
Cool. Yeah, and mind you, Chris, I think this is important. The North Koreans were doing an excellent job. Like they were actually some of them were committing espionage, right? Like stealing secrets from these companies that they were working, but never mind that. So most of them were like really doing an excellent job programming and giving the companies really good programming services.
They just want to make the money. They want to do the job, and they found a way to work around companies not wanting to hire overseas. So
because Kim Jong-un, the North Korean dictator, they need money into their economy.
Right.
And it was significant. And the FBI director or whoever at the FBI said, no, this is a meaningful way to get money into North Korea. So I guess Kim Jong-un can test more missiles. So that's why they were really trying to shut it down. So what do you think? So based on what you know, is Christina, at this point, do you feel good about a prosecutor taking that case? Because she's going to be up there. If I represent Christina, I'm going to say, look, she thought this was a legitimate job. She thought that she was providing a service to these international contractors that were doing coding. She didn't know that this was illegal.
No. She's going to get in trouble. They're going to find a way. It's not just I was helping. It's clear you were trying to skirt something. Now, I think what most people make the mistake on is they think, okay, fine. If they're doing something bad, then what happens is I get caught, I tell all, I get a slap on the wrist because maybe I was skirting some Wire Act laws or telephone laws or something by allowing someone to use a computer, and they don't think that they're going to be the ones on the hook for the big thing. So remaining ignorant about what may or may not have happened is going to get them off the hook. But my guess is she was going to find herself very wrong, and she's going to be prosecuted probably pretty heavily. Based on what you're telling me and knowing nothing else about the case, but based on the facts as you've given them to me, to discourage that and to make sure people understand the seriousness of that many foreign entities into the United States without being truthful. If we want foreign entities and foreign people working for U.S. companies, that's fine. but it's the deceit. It's the making it look like everything's staying here. And so these companies don't know their data is going offshore. I think there's going to be some pretty harsh consequences.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I was on the fence about it. I could see the defense. I could see a jury being sympathetic to her. I also remember in a criminal, we don't practice criminal law, but in a criminal case, that prosecutor has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And that prosecutor has to show mens rea that she knew she was doing something criminal. I was on the fence until the smoking gun and the prosecutor, she texted, they were having her falsify W-4s and having her falsify I-9s. And she had a message where she told the North Koreans, like, hey, this is the last time that I'm going to sign your name and falsify this. Please get someone else to do this in the future so that I could end up in federal prison for this. That is conclusive mens rea evidence in my mind. She knew what she did. She knew it was criminal. Chris, she struck a deal. She took a plea bargain. She's going to get sentenced in July, I think. And she up to 9 years in a federal, probably minimum security federal prison. So sad thing for her. I guess she knew what she was doing. She committed a crime. Very interesting story as far as how North Korea and some of these countries that are on these bad actor countries are trying to get money into their economy. And if the North Koreans are doing that, I'm sure like Russia and China and Iran are doing some of these similar things is the idea. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our legal questions section. Chris, I'm going to lean on you pretty heavily on this one. We're talking about executor fees. I get this question all the time. Hey, as an executor, what do I get to charge? Can I make money? I even had an executor the other day, Chris. We realized that he was not a named beneficiary in the will, and he was wanting to serve as executor, and he wasn't going to get anything. And he said, can I get my 5%? What's your answer to that? Can they do that? Is that a common thing, Chris? Can you give us some light or color to that?
You can get it, but it's not. And I think this has been the subject of some change. So this is not a CLE. If it's changed and I've missed it, don't hold me to it. We might have to do an update because I don't know if it's changed. It's not a straight 5%. It's 5% of in and out. And that doesn't mean I went to the bank and I collected $1 million. That's not money in. Okay. That's money that's already there. It has to be money that you had to either file a claim to get, pursue someone to get, file a lawsuit to get. And then again, money out is not money paid to beneficiaries. Money out is payments to professionals, tax professionals, lawyers, payments on debts, payments to whatever's owed. And so that number, even on $1 million estate, is going to be pretty low. If you sell a house, you can get the 5% on that, but not if you use an agent, because they're going to collect a commission on that. So collecting the money and paying out the money, there's so little that goes into that when people say, do I get anything? I say, if you're asking me up front, if you're going to get paid anything, the answer is no. If you're doing this because you think the money is going to be worth your time, the answer is no. Do it because this is your friend or your mom and you want to if you're not a beneficiary and this is your friend or your mom left everything to charity, didn't leave anything to you, do it because you want to carry out their wishes, not because you think it's going to be in any way financially worth it to you.
Yeah, Chris, you're right. Chris does not look at the outlines for the show, so he's doing this from memory and his experience. I've got the outline in front of me. It's Estates Code section 352.002, and it's 5%, but it's pretty limited, as Chris is saying. You don't just get the money out of a bank account. That doesn't count, okay? You actually have to, the spirit of this, Chris, it looks like you actually have to do something. I think the important thing that we're answering here is that this 5% that you see in the Estates Code is not so easy. And there's some obvious things where if it's sitting in a bank account, you're not going to get that. But there is the idea that if you really are pursuing something, you can get some of that. All right, let's move on to our next legal question. And this one is just general. We're talking about reading statutes. And Chris, you and I have agonized over some statutes in previous years. And I'm not embarrassed to say, Chris, we have gotten some just absolutely wrong. I remember an occupations code or a Texas real estate licensing rule we were trying to read one time. And the whole definition hinged on whether it was the or, and Chris had a good point even back then, you've probably forgotten. These code sections are written by real people, and the legislators will assign a committee to write these things, and they don't write these things in the most clear and unambiguous way. And in fact, they often write them grammatically incorrect. So anytime we're agonizing over a statute, my guiding principle, and Chris, tell me how you feel about this, is try to read the statute in context and pull a logical meaning out of a statute, because that's what the courts are going to do. Chris, agree or disagree?
Agree. We don't want to read something as meaningless. That's for sure. So if you read it
Yeah.
and it
We
doesn't
had
make any
one,
sense, we don't want that result. We want the result that makes sense.
yeah. We had one today, Chris, this morning, and I was in the Google space with all of our lawyers, and it was just blowing my mind. And I put it out there in the Google space. And this was actually about executory contracts, 5.062 of the property code. And we were trying to figure out the applicability section. I don't want to bore the listeners with all that, but the statute read, the analogy of this, Chris, would be it was something like, don't play ball in the house, or don't play ball in the house with green and red balls. So the second part of that is redundant. Well, how could you possibly, what is the committee or what is the legislature trying to write about that? Surely if all they meant was don't play balls in the house, they would have said don't play balls in the house, period. So you have to figure out, what are they trying to say when they add an or and says don't play balls in the house, or don't play balls in the house with red and green balls. And it turns out that we had to go back the sentence before and figure out that they were talking about two different houses. So
I like what we're talking about, but the analogy makes perfect sense. The analogy does make perfect sense.
Yeah. And we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of this code section. And Chris, let me pat someone on the back. She did not give me permission to say this, but we were all confused, and Ashley jumped in with just like the light bulb answer. Ashley, if you're out there listening to the show, great job on that. Shout out to Ashley. Pretty incredible. All right. That's how you read statutes. You got to look at context. You got to subscribe meaning. You got to understand that the committees and the legislature are real people, and that they don't always have the most perfect command of grammar. And sometimes they do get confused between or, and that can create a whole different meaning. And commas can create different meanings too, Chris. So that you be careful with your commas. I used to have an English teacher who would criticize me and say, Mr. Silverman, did you just sprinkle commas all throughout your page? She wouldn't call me Mr. Silverman back then, but you want to be careful with those commas. All right. That brings us to my favorite part of the show. It's our rant and rave section. And we're going to talk real quickly here about contractors. And I wouldn't describe this as a nightmare, but Chris, you ever have people come and work on your house?
Too soon, Phil. Too soon doing this to me. Yeah, I've had people work on my house.
I guess it's a sore subject with a lot of people, because you need people to come work on your house, but it's expensive sometimes. So that has to happen. I had a contractor out, Chris, and I hired a carpenter to do some woodwork repair. In places like Texas and Houston, we have a lot of good carpenters, but carpenters are not the most solvent people in the world. It's not like you're not having this super professional, well-heeled, really expensive contractor come out to your house to do this kind of work. If you were having that kind of contractor do that, you'd pay an arm and a leg. And if the guy broke something, you'd expect him to hold up his end of the bargain and fix it. But when you hire the kind of contractors that mostly we have in Texas, they're going to break stuff. They're going to tear stuff up. And sometimes they break things that are more expensive than the entire value of the job. So I had the contractor, he was doing some woodwork repair, and he broke two of the windows. And these are big windows, and the windows are probably $1,000 each. And I think his whole bid was like $1,000. So he was going to get paid $1,000, but he broke $2,000 in stuff. Chris, what do you do? What do you think? You got an insolvent contractor, not super nice guy. You love the contractor. What do you do?
That's a lot of money. Are they insured? We tend to look for people who are insured. I want
Exactly.
people that are actually insured so that I know if they do something, their insurance policy is going to cover it. I have not had that issue because, yeah, you could just be stuck. That would be really bad. You're not going to sue someone for $2,000, but that's a really bad spot to take that kind of loss.
Yeah, it is. If you're hiring people now, Chris is talking, hire someone that's going to be high quality, hire someone that's going to have insurance. Most of the time in Texas, that's really hard to do. If you're going to have someone do a big project, I definitely recommend you make sure the guy it does have insurance. There's going to be some debate over if a contractor does cause some damage, is the insurance really going to cover that if the contractor was negligent? Because those types of policies may not have that type of clause in there. It's a tough situation. You're going to pay a lot of money if you're going to hire fully insured contractors that are going to be able to make that kind of thing good. If you're doing small repairs and it's just the random guy coming out to the house and he breaks something, that's a tough one for that guy to eat. What we did, what really bothered me is the guy didn't tell me about it, right? And he wanted me to pay him. I wasn't going to notice that the windows were cracked. So that's really what upset me. But we ended up working it out. Who knows whether the guy comes back and actually makes it good and fixes the stuff. I try to give my lesson here is for people is or my advice rather, is you need to keep contractors on short leashes. If you're going to pay him to do some stuff, don't pay him too much in advance. Be sure you pay him commensurate with the work that he's doing. And if he does break something, you're just going to have to talk it out with him because the idea, if you're going to call our law firm and say, hey, please sue my painter that broke my $10,000 vase, that's probably a no-go. The painter doesn't have that kind of money and he may not even have insurance and the insurance may not even cover it. So if you really do have the kind of place or the kind of house where you're doing some expensive kind of repairs, you've got expensive things in your house, you probably do need to pay a lot for a contractor, and that's going to be a lot more expensive. So that's our pro tip for the show. All right, that brings our show to a close. I've been your host, Phil Silverman. Chris Hield has been my co-host. Like us, follow us, review us wherever you get your podcast. And as a reminder, nothing in the show is to be considered legal advice, and this has all been for entertainment purposes only. If you have a legal question, email us at info@silblawfirm.com. That's SILB like boy, lawfirm.com. Tell us you want it publicly answered in the podcast. Everybody have a great rest of your week and weekend.